I set out to make a video here about the memorial to homosexual victims of National Socialism. It's right in the center of town on the edge of the Tiergarten. But when I was writing away, thinking, what do I want to say about this? What do I want to say to you? I just thought you can't take those 12 years in isolation. The history is bigger than this. So where do we start? Well, you can go back for centuries and centuries and centuries, but when it comes to institutionalized homophobia in Germany, we have to start in 1871 with the introduction of paragraph 175. Now, the Empire of Germany was only founded in 1871. Paragraph 175 was one of the very first laws introduced in this new country. It tells you just how important it was to the lawmakers at the time. This is one of the first things we should do. The law made sexual relations between men illegal and therefore did not focus on women. Women had obviously very little position of power, esteem, anything at the time. Those homophobic lawmakers certainly did not fear women and, in my opinion, likely did not understand lesbianism at all. They just didn't view women as equals. This means, of course, that men are persecuted for their sexuality in a legal sense over the next few decades. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen to women. It just means that it's very hard for us to find out how, why, when. It means it's not recorded, which is, very typical when it comes to women in history. The next point that we have to look at is the Weimar period where, everything just kind of exploded. There are 3 different gay districts in Berlin at this time. I mean, I've got a book here, Kurt Morek's Guide to the Sinful Berlin. This listed for people in the late Weimar period where different bars were for, men, for women, for trans people as well. Berlin at this time was a real beacon for people who were not heterosexual. This was a place where they could come and just frankly be themselves. And I should say, as a heterosexual person, I can't fully understand it, right? It's never happened to me. I've always been able to just be who I am wherever I want to be. But Berlin becomes this incredibly important place. And one of the people we have to thank for that is Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, who was gay and Jewish, I believe communist as well, so there's going to be a very big target on his back. In 1919, he helped to fund the first ever movie featuring gay main characters. 1919, it's called Anders als die Enden. And, this comes out decades before a similar movie will come out in other countries. In Britain, it's in the 1960s. In East Germany, it's the 1980s. I mean, talk about being ahead of your time. What Hirschfeld is perhaps best well known for, though, is acting as a psychologist for members of the LGBTQ community, finding out why their lives are so difficult, talking about how society treats them, about how oppressed people are. He makes great leaps forward, especially just because for him, none of this is shameful. People are able to open up. But let's talk about that target on his back. When the Nazis come into power and when the first book burning is organized, the very first one, about 50% of the books that are burned belong to Hirschfeld. His Institute for Sexual Research is raided and an effigy of Hirschfeld is burned above the books. He was somewhat written out of history for a long time, yes, but his existence and his experiences are incredibly, incredibly important. This also brings us to a great point of hypocrisy. The Nazis would surely not have come to power without the brown shirts. They would not have been able to establish a dictatorship without the brown shirts. The very first concentration camps, the so-called wild camps, are run by the brown shirts. And who is their leader at that time? None other than Ernst Röhm. Röhm was known to have hung out in the El Dorado Club down in Schöneberg in the gay district. He would have interacted with other LGBTQ people in the El Dorado. It was a place that was known for what at the time were called transvestites, to hang out, men in women's clothing. Röhm was openly gay. He would have relations with many of his men. This was in no way a secret. And the Nazis were saying that homosexuality was a sign of the degeneracy and the decadence of the age and something that was not just to be got rid of it, it was to be got rid of for a purpose. Because the purpose of the German people is to, well, create more Germans. And any man that is not doing that, that is sleeping with men instead of women, and therefore choosing not to have children, is a traitor to German society. One of the key proponents of this was, unsurprisingly, Heinrich Himmler. Himmler, in the mid-30s, would set up the Office Against Homosexuality and Abortion. To him, same thing. If a kid isn't happening, that is a problem, and a problem that should be solved with men in uniform and with blunt force. It's worth noting that obviously homosexuality was rife within Heinrich Himmler's SS, and that if people were thought to be homosexual, they would, well, pay the price, let's say. Those are just the ones in SS uniforms. What about Section 175? You can bet that the Nazis absolutely loved it. For them, this was a law that was too weak, so they strengthened it. No longer was it just about relations, physical relations. It was about looking at somebody in a certain way, holding hands. They used this as a pretense to arrest between 50 and 55,000 people. The exact numbers are not quite there, but certainly tens of thousands of people, which then begs the question, who is gay anyway? If it's going to be a life and death issue, it better be well defined. And the fact is, let's say you want the apartment upstairs because it's nicer. Well, I saw that guy leaving hand in hand with another guy out of this bar. Right? These are the kind of things people would say in Nazi Germany to get what they wanted, to get ahead in life. There's a natural instinct to do that. And accusing someone of being homosexual, to discredit them, to ruin their life, ruin their career, again, that precedes and succeeds the Nazis. It's just that in Nazi Germany, the stakes were much higher. What this tells us, therefore, is, again, Section 175 is a good barometer. It tells us where society was at. It does not mean that those 50 or 55,000 men that were arrested were definitely gay. And again, it doesn't tell us anything about women and trans people that would be arrested either. But it's a bellwether. Maximum 15,000 men would be arrested under this law and sent to concentration camps, where on their blue and white striped uniforms they would wear a pink-coloured triangle, highlighting not just to the guards but all other prisoners that they were gay. Now, imagine in a society that is homophobic anyway and becoming more so, having to be out, and even if you're not proud, was, again, it was life-threatening, really. In the absence of Jews, gay men were treated the worst by the guards. They were just next up on the ladder there. And I say in the absence of Jews because when we think of the camps, we think that they're only full of Jews, but it's just not really the case. Especially before World War II, when the camps are just in Germany. Well, only 1% of the population in Germany is Jewish. So the vast majority of concentration camp prisoners, therefore, were also not Jewish. And when we look at one of those early camps, Zaxenhausen, where I have been a guide since 2011, we can see what happened to gay men in those camps. In Zaxenhausen, these men were given one of the most brutal work details, the shoe testing track. Bit of context, Germany had run out of leather in the First World War. People couldn't buy shoes. The Nazis didn't want that to happen. And so they got a whole bunch of shoe companies, almost 40 of them, to work on this kind of artificial leather. So we're always going to be able to make shoes, we're always going to be able to make boots for the military, and to test them fairly, we'll have these gay men run around inside the camp for 12 hours. 12 hours, 6 hours on a Sunday. When they started to use them to make these army boots, then they had to carry heavy bags of sand and do so-called exercise breaks, hold them above their heads, right? Standing still, holding this heavy bag above their heads. All while being starved, beaten, shunned by other prisoners. The average life expectancy on this work detail was under 2 weeks. Gay men inside of Zaxenhausen were also given some of the most brutal forms of torture, namely strappado, having their arms tied behind their backs and hooked over these metal spikes and dropped so that their arms would not be ripped off, but they would be torn from their joints, and then they could be shaken around, beaten by the guards, and those same guards would shout homophobic things at them. Men given this torture could also say that they had been cured of their homosexuality and actually be released from the camp as well. And of course, whether or not the Nazis believed this, who can say, but the end effect would be that they would not be openly gay. 1945 rolls around. The Nazis are defeated, and the whole world does not exactly look at what happened under the Nazis and say, well, that's what we shouldn't do, right? The world does not become totally egalitarian, a paradise after this, far from it. When East and West Germany are formed at the end of the 1940s, both of them still use Section 175, not in exactly the same way that the Nazis would. I mean, technically East Germany has it on the books like that, but they don't enforce it in that way. But it brings us to this really sad truth. In 1949, if you had been in a camp because you were a gypsy, Jew, communist, you could say that that's what happened to you. You could talk about it. Many people found that very difficult. It wasn't so easy, but it wasn't illegal. Whereas, particularly, it turns out was the case in West Germany, it wasn't just that people couldn't talk about it. It's that it was still illegal. There are, as far as I know, cases of people being arrested for the same so-called crime only a few years after the Nazis were defeated. When we look at Dachau, the first concentration camp site to open as a memorial in West Germany, they just didn't talk about it. They had these different triangles there, but not the pink one for homosexual victims. I mean, whoever was building that museum and didn't think, are we being similar to the Nazis? I mean, it absolutely blows your mind, but yeah, this was the case. Now, at the end of the 1960s, both East and West Germany will effectively legalize homosexuality. There'll be a different age of consent. East Germany does go first, by the way, and is a little more lax. They'll fully remove Section 175 in the 80s, which means that it actually comes back a second time for East Germans that then find themselves in this newly reunified Germany. And even though, of course, it's nowhere near as drastic as what's happening under the Nazis, the law is still on the books and people are still being arrested right the way through to 1994, which, yeah, is beyond shocking. It's then repealed. In the early 2000s, the German government will issue an apology. These so-called crimes from the past will be annulled, and plans go into action to build the memorial to the homosexual victims of National Socialism, which, yeah, is then opened in 2008. It's designed by a Scandinavian couple, one Danish, one Norwegian, and it looks like one of the blocks from across the road from the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. That is intentional. At first, I'll be honest with you, I just didn't get that. I just thought, wow, okay, like I know it's a smaller part of the history, but you're just making it look so much lesser. What's that about? But the reasoning behind it is great. The reasoning is it shows the separation and the similarity felt by prisoners inside of the concentration camps. However, the memorial at first was really just for men, for gay men. And we can see this with the little window inside that shows you a clip of a movie playing that just showed two men kissing, being affectionate in public, which is something that, you know, even today, 2025, is not always possible for homosexual people. That movie was then updated to show a more diverse range of sexualities. Sad, definitely sad to have got it wrong in the first place, but at least it's been updated, at least it's been changed. Now, due to it being so difficult for gay victims of the Nazis to stand up and say who they were, by the time this memorial was opened, it was thought that there were no surviving people who had been made to wear that pink triangle, which was a bit awkward for a certain Mr. Rudolf Brazda, a man of Czech heritage who had grown up in Germany, had obviously realized he was gay and had ended up in the Buchenwald concentration camp. He was able to survive by having a relationship with a capo. A capo is a kind of prisoner/guard almost. It's a bit more complex, but we'll just call it that for now. And after the war was finished, decided to move to France, where it was legal. Perhaps not celebrated, but it was legal to be gay. When this monument opened in 2008, in May, he wasn't quite at the opening ceremony, but he did show up about a month later. He was photographed there alongside Klaus Wowereit, who was mayor of Berlin at the time and was one of the first, if not the first, openly gay elected politician in Germany, was very popular in his time. And amazingly, at the age of 95, Brajda went to his first ever gay pride parade just after this. He would spend the next years visiting concentration camps, talking about his experiences, being interviewed. Only in this very, very, very last stage of his life did he become this fantastic figure and fantastic resource for people like you and me to learn from. He is, unsurprisingly and sadly, no longer with us. He died in 2011, aged 98. Section 175 is now, of course, just a memory, but yeah, is a super important part of this country's history and this city's history. So I hope that you have learned something here. I hope that you've enjoyed, as it were, learning about this. Thank you so much for watching. Hey, if you could like and subscribe and become a Patreon person, that'd be the best. All right.